Hello and welcome. I am live from Pelham's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pelham's Wasteland Reads for you all. This time covering two books. Michael Punke or Punk, I don't know if you pronounce the E or not, but his book called Ridgeline, a novel, and Tales from the Texas Woods by Michael Moorcock. Both of these sort of somewhat related by being, I guess, westerns, basically. I mean, Tales from the Texas Woods is not all westerns, but the titular short story definitely is a western and is a lot of fun. And so I thought I would talk about both of these two together because I read them recently and they're both pretty good. So I read one of Michael I'm going to say Punk, I guess. Hopefully that's correct. One of his earlier books, which is The Revenant, which was adapted into the movie. I don't know if you remember from a few years ago that Leonardo DiCaprio won an Oscar for and all that sort of stuff. Movie is pretty good. Book is also pretty good and is about, mountain men living out in the frontier wilderness. Ridgeline is something of a similar setting, a little bit later in time period, is set in Montana, a little bit after the end of the American Civil War, and basically leading up to an event that is called the Fetterman Fight, an ambushing of a force of U.S. cavalry soldiers at a fort on the frontier that was put in place basically to protect pioneering groups traveling into the Montana territory, especially for mining for gold in that area, apparently. And yeah, it is historical fiction that covers a number of the characters who all were basically real people. There's some invented characters as well, but also a number of the characters in the book went on to write memoirs and various other writings about their experiences, especially their experiences around the events in the book. And one of the kind of interesting things about this particular book is that it apparently puts forward something of a different position on the way that for a long time the events that are reported were interpreted, by which I mean that there are a couple of different officers in the US cavalry, and the presentation of both their you might say their personalities, their particular character flaws, maybe is the better way to put it, and therefore the assignment of blame to the different characters with regards to what is a fairly significant massacre at the time, a pretty complete overwhelming of a large force of U.S. cavalry soldiers. Um, the assignment of blame that happened kind of in the immediate aftermath of the events was shaped by the reporting of many of the characters involved in these events, and that over time there has been some pushback on the sort of more convenient elements of that narrative, and that this particular version of the reporting of the events leading up to and then during the Fetterman fight basically um, takes a more kind of contemporary view of a lot of these events. So, anyway, I did not really know very much about all of the things going on in Ridgeline when I read it, but it is interesting that it comes at a period and a sort of area that there's a couple of things that I've read that are all sort of related to this, for lack of a better term, the conquest of the West, especially moving into the American Northwest, Montana, and then of course further afield into like Oregon and Washington eventually. But a lot of this kind of Great Plains and Rocky Mountains territory that was taken over by the United States in the War. There are a handful of books that I've read recently that all sort of attached to this Fool's Crow in particular by James Welch that I did a video on earlier this year that I thought was really good. Covers a similar period and a kind of similar region. This one does not just follow one character. We follow both a number of characters from the United States, either within the U.S. cavalry or characters who are attached to them on some level. One of the characters is one of the officers' wives. There's also a number of civilians who are in some way related to this kind of process of conquering the West and manifest destiny and all of that. And then we also have a number of characters who are Native Americans, largely Native Americans, who are involved in the, the fight against these U.S. cavalry forces. And this is a pretty interesting period because there's a discussion in the afterword about the point that this is an event that happens very quickly on the heels of the conclusion of the American Civil War, and that this perception of a devastating defeat is enough to slow down some amount of expansion for a time, partly because it comes in the aftermath of the immense bloodshed of the Civil War, and that does not hold true another 15 or 20 years later as the kind of later periods of particularly aggressive violence between the Native Americans and the forces allied with the United States government end up coming into play, and that this kind of makes this period an interesting sort of transition time between the relative disinterest in the frontier during the Civil War itself and the growing interest in the frontier afterwards. And so there's an interesting thing going on there with this the sort of particulars of the historical events of 1865, 1866, and then on into the later 1860s. Anyway, so yeah, Ridgeline, it's pretty good. I had fun with it. It's, I think, fairly well crafted historical fiction that is worth checking out. Then, the other one that I wanted to talk about, the other book that's up on the screen, or at least the cover is up on the screen, is Tales from the Texas Woods by Michael Moorcock. And this is a collection that was put out by Mojo Press. And Mojo Press is a now defunct, as far as I can tell, small press that put out a number of different things, including a number of things by Michael Moorcock. This one in particular is a collection of a couple of pieces of short fiction that are all basically related to kind of Texas and the American West, as well as a handful of pieces of nonfiction, book reviews and the like. Most of that isn't really very related to Westerns. Although there is, I will say, an interesting foreword to this collection written by Moorcock for this collection in particular, and he talks about basically the popularity of the Western and the fact that what he knew about the Western was basically just from reading other pulp Westerns. But because it was so popular, he was able to support himself, as he puts it, just churning out these pulp Westerns basically for other people who had about the same amount of familiarity with the actuality of the American Southwest, which is to say almost none at all. Him as a British pulp author writing for British pulp readers, who all of whom their kind of ideas about the American West being structured by these pulp westerns more than any actual familiarity with the region and the complex history and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, perhaps the most interesting part of this collection is the title story. I I guess it's not the title story. It's the first story in the collection, and it's probably the most exciting one. Like I said, where we have the masked buckaroo, who is a vigilante Western hero. He's very much like the Lone Ranger, right? He's a you know talented and capable warrior, but he's also a kind of chivalrous ideal and all these other things. And um, his wife and mentor are kidnapped by El Lobo Blanco, who is a leader of a particular kind of militarized cult among the Apaches, and who seems to have some strange magical abilities, I guess you might say. There's something weird going on, and of course, what we find out is that El Lobo Blanco, the White Wolf, is you know got some Eternal Champion stuff going on that is a lot of fun, and in especially a lot of fun in a setting like this that is totally different than so much of the other Eternal Champion stuff. And there's a really kind of a interesting tonal shift that goes on between this Eternal Champion figure, who is this um, grim and strange and much more gothic figure than these kind of big boisterous Western heroes. And the masked buckaroo is certainly this kind of big boisterous Western hero who is he's a good guy, and he's kind of he's not totally a Boy Scout, but he's sort of along those lines, all that sort of stuff. And so there's a really interesting kind of tension going on in the story at times that I think really is part of why that particular story is a lot of fun. There's another story in this collection that is a Sherlock Holmes. I guess you'd call it a pastiche, a story about Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, written by someone other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. That also involves some craziness going on with the American South, and I won't say too much more about it, but there's some clever, twists and turns, and it's a fun story and all that sort of stuff. Um, and then the final story in particular, I think, is another real highlight because it is another sort of Eternal Champion story, and there's some really cool kind of uh, post-war, post-colonial stuff going on. I guess you might say this idea of the Eternal Champion as he fits into this kind of 1950s and 60s era, like Western Europe and Mediterranean, and he has been spending time fighting in North Africa and maybe kind of running like a weird kind of like Splinter Kingdom sort of thing. It's all very kind of strange, and all of these rumors going on about this, um, you know, very very dangerous character who are two uh, not heroes, but the two characters that are one of whom is our viewpoint character basically for the story have heard rumors about this Eternal Champion style character, and there's some cool stuff that has been going on, and I think it does a really good job of showcasing a side of this Eternal Champion idea that sometimes we don't, I think, see as much in a lot of, especially a lot of the earlier stuff that was published along those lines. You have all of these kind of fantastical worlds, all of this kind of strange stuff going on um, in the Empire of Melniboné, and then in the kind of post the Dreaming City, after the Empire of Melniboné has mostly collapsed, this strange world that Elric inhabits. And you also have all of the weird post-apocalyptic stuff with the Runestaff stories and Hawkmoon and Count Brass and all that sort of stuff. And you have similar kind of weird fantastical stuff going on with the Quorum stories. But there's something I think really exciting and fun about the way that the two of the stories that I mentioned, the first and the last stories in this collection, treat this idea of the Eternal Champion and the multiverse and all of that as being something that is also present in a much more grounded setting, and surrounding this kind of non-fantastical stuff, this kind of figure who has this sort of aura of fantastical or mystical menace in a world that doesn't seem to make concessions to that, really is really kind of fun and interesting. And I liked it a lot. Unfortunately, I don't think Tales from the Texas Woods is that easy to get a hold of. I don't remember how much I paid for it, maybe like 10 or 15 bucks on Abe Books. And the seller had a number of other things that I wanted, so I was able to get a good deal on the shipping by getting, five or six things from them all at once. I don't think there's any type of ebook version of Tales from the Texas Woods, but there is for Ridgeline, so that makes it pretty easy to find if you are an ebook reader. Um, Otherwise, yeah, I would say if you are a fan of Michael Moorcock, Tales from the Texas Woods is totally worth checking out. If you're not already a fan of Moorcock, it probably won't change your mind about his writing. But as someone who is a fan and who has read a number of the things that he's written and liked a number of the things that he's written, I had a lot of fun with it. So worth checking out if you are in that same position. If you like Michael Moorcock and want kind of these different versions of the Eternal Champion and some good nonfiction essays, I will say most of them are pretty short, but there's some cool essays and book reviews and stuff mixed in with Tales from the Texas Woods. So anyway, um, both of those books pretty fun, and like I said, worth checking out if they sound interesting to you. Let me know in the comments if you read either of these, if you've heard about either of these. I actually heard about Tales from the Texas Woods from another YouTuber. I've been watching his stuff, Secret Fire Books. He got a copy, and I thought, oh, well, that looks super cool. I feel like I ought to check out that particular book. But yeah, if you have read either of these, heard about them, want to talk about them, leave a comment down below. Otherwise, I guess like and subscribe and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, buddy.